It also means that no matter what they do, China, as an internationally diverse, economically wired country, is not long for this world. The Chinese have degraded into a cult of personality that makes Mao look inclusive. And they have become hostage to their own ideology. And it's leading to a series of cascading policy decisions across the system. The COVID policy is one of those. And the capacity of the Chinese system to adapt and get out of its own way, at least at the moment, is gone. Xi has killed the messenger so many times that it's difficult to get him any real information. So their ability to move beyond the blind ideology of the propaganda arm is seriously constrained at them. The Chinese decision to back the Russians in this war has really changed mindsets. Let me give you two things. I mean, there's a dozen major reasons that I don't think the Chinese system is going to survive this decade, but let me give you the two that are absolutely unassailable. First of all, China is the third most internationally integrated country in the world after the Germans and the Koreans. They are utterly dependent upon globalized access to raw materials and markets the world over. They import the raw materials, they import the technology, people forget that piece sometimes, and then they export the finished goods. That does not work without a globalized world, and there is no coalition of countries that can replace the United States as the guarantor of that world. And with the Americans going their own way, that's it. The entire economic model doesn't work. Semiconductors is probably the best space to see how exposed the Chinese are. They can't make the high-end or the mid-end chips, and they can't make the equipment to make the low-end chips. They are completely dependent upon tech transfers from the rest of the world in order to sustain that entire industry. And now we have the Dutch, the Danes, the Brits, the Japanese, the Koreans, and the Taiwanese, along with the Americans, saying that never again can the Chinese access high-end chips at all. And the question is, what mid-end chips can they have, and whether they should be able to have the equipment necessary to make the low-end chips. So we're talking in the course of just the last few months, their access to that space has stopped. But the second problem, unfortunately, is much worse, and that's the demographic situation. According to the Chinese themselves, with the data they're starting to let out, they've overcounted their population by over 100 million people. All of those overcounts for people who would have been born since the one-child policy has been adopted, which was 40 years ago, so people 40 and under. And they were already looking at one of the fastest drop-offs in terms of birth rate in human history. You need 2.1 births per woman to maintain your population. In their metro centers, they're now below 0.7. I mean, this is faster than the Korean drop-off, and they haven't developed nearly as much as the Koreans have. So if these numbers are true, they're going to lose almost 2 Americas of population in just the next 30 years. And the average age will be older than the Japanese are now. This is not something, we don't even have a model. If you're talking about a population that drops by almost half in 30 years and the people that are left are in their 50s and 60s, I don't see how that can function.
Chairman Xi has consolidated more power unto himself, that he has built a tighter cult of personality than any world leader in any era, including the Kim dynasty of North Korea. He has excommunicated or imprisoned or intimidated into silence or executed everyone in the Chinese system who is capable of independent thought. And he has finally become what Donald Trump always wanted to be. It's him, it's the voices in his head, and it's adoration from everyone else. And that's it. And so we are getting a series of catastrophic policy decisions out of Beijing, because no one wants to bring any information to their leader. Not information that they think will set them off, any information at all. So last May, when the power went out around China, we had rolling blackouts. Xi didn't find out about it until September. And now we've got COVID. Now, there's a diversity of opinions on COVID in North America. Some of us are like, vaccines are the only way to go. Others of us are like, natural immunity is probably the right route. And I think if we're all being honest with one another, at least with ourselves, at home, in the dark, with the doors locked and the blinds pulled, we'll admit that the other side has some relevant points that we should consider. But these aren't options in China. And it's not because of the information blackout. It's because the Chinese vaccine doesn't work, and the CCP has been successful at keeping COVID out of the general population, so no one has natural immunity. China is also the country, aside from Ukraine, obviously, that is going to suffer the most from the Ukraine war. Now, we've talked about the Western oil route and the tanker raft and how that's going to go belly up in no time. But there's another route. There's a lot of crude, about 2 million barrels a day, that the Chinese import from eastern Siberia. And unlike the crude in Western Siberia, the Eastern Siberian wells, the Russians didn't do. The fields were too technically challenging. They couldn't do any of it. That was all BP and a series of Western services firms that are, for the most part, gone. So we know it's all going to break down. We just don't know how soon. We've never had this volume of an abandonment of technical infrastructure before. 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 3 years, don't know. But it's all going away. And then there's this little issue with semiconductors. The Chinese don't produce their own semiconductors. They don't design them at all. They import the equipment that is necessary to build them, and they import the tools that are necessary to operate that equipment and the software that runs on it. They also import the labor that's necessary to manage the whole thing. They don't know how to do it themselves. And what Biden did last week is he criminalized the import of the equipment, the tools, the software, and he told Americans working in Chinese semiconductor fabs that you have to now make a choice. You can be an American citizen or you can keep your job in China. And within 24 hours, every American worker in the entire space was either transferred abroad or quit. It's over. The Chinese don't know how to operate their own stuff. They've just basically become paperweights. So they're probably going to run some of the low-end stuff for a little bit longer, but they can't get any more gear. So the technological rise of the Chinese system is now behind us. And it's time to start talking about the fall. So long as we are stuck with manufacturing of green tech in its current form, so long as lithium is our only battery medium, we will have no choice to build out significant volumes of lithium processing somewhere other than China, because the Chinese can't maintain it themselves. Why not Manitoba? You guys have the lithium. You need to produce it. But you have all the hydropower you could ever want. And that's the single biggest expense when it comes to processing. So if you can handle the prospecting while you handle the permitting, while you build the infrastructure, while you build the rail system, while you build out the hydropower, and if you can do all of that in 5 years, then yes, Manitoba would become the world's most sought after lithium source. Now that is a lot of ifs. And that means changing the way you operate in a significant way. But the brass ring is there to be grabbed if you're interested. I wouldn't worry too much about the Chinese moving forward. One of the things that the Biden administration has done, honestly, just in the last several days, is the high-end and the mid-quality chips that form the basis for the entirety of the Chinese tech sector, they can't get anymore. So we're already seeing staff bleeding out from the firms in China that were working with big data and artificial intelligence because they can no longer get the equipment that is necessary for them to do their jobs in the first place. And their semiconductor industry is about 30 or 40 years behind where the West is. So they know that if they get started right now, they're not going to be able to get back to where they were with big data and AI before at least 2050. So that whole developmental process that the Chinese had bet so much on, it's already dead.